I think the number one thing that Democrats are going to be targeting after the Biden era is identity, which is really sad. They're not looking for the best candidate to
Yeah.
operate the country. They're just looking for the best candidate that they think people are going to sit and say, yeah, I'm going to vote for that candidate. The late, great Herman Cain said back in 2012, and I remember this, he said, you voted for Barack Obama to prove you're not racist. Now vote for me to prove you're not stupid. But I think they're going to be looking younger, and they're going to be looking for people that have, skin tone, really. So I'm thinking, your AOCs, they're going to elevate those higher, maybe into cabinet positions, similar to what they did with Pete Buttigieg. I'm thinking they're really going to go for the identity politics for the next few years, I think. And it could really pay off for them if they're able to really recapture culture. But I think that's all they're going to care about.
Welcome to the Michele Tafoya podcast.
I call myself kind of a day trader on X. It's like I go through and I look at what accounts are maybe trending or growing or interest me. And I like to invite a lot of these people onto the podcast to amplify their voices if I think that they are worth it. And this kid is worth it. He's 19 years old. I'm going to read you his profile on X. 19-year-old Gen Z commentator, 5-time Billboard charting artist, freedom fighter, media personality, and he's followed by some really interesting people as well. That's also the way I sort of gauge whether or not I'm going to invite this person on. Chandler Crump is delightful, and you're going to hear more of him in a matter of moments. So I'm excited for you to meet Damani Felder. I didn't know him until this interview today, and I am thrilled to get to know this guy. He's visited the Trump White House 3 times. He is smart. He is well positioned because of life experience to talk about the things we're going to talk about today. So on your, I'm like a day trader on X. I look for people who I think are on the rise. He's at Real C Crump, by the way, and you can see that in our lower thirds, a 19-year-old Gen Z commentator, 5-time Billboard charting artist, freedom fighter, and, your pinned tweet I want to talk about first because it has to do with Trump. You say they slandered Trump. They, quote unquote, investigated Trump. They convicted Trump. Now they shot Trump. He still fights. We will win. What is it about Donald Trump that makes you a supporter?
It's his rebel spirit. If I got to be honest, Trump has been, I'd say, a part of my life for most of it now. Back in 2016, I was maybe around 11, maybe 12. And that was the first election I really witnessed and got to in some way be conscious of. And the very first thing I thought was, who is this Trump guy? He seems kind of crazy. The whole news media is like, oh, this guy is going to destroy the world. Or around that time, actually, they were saying, oh, he has no chance to win. And I was like, okay, I guess I don't have to worry about anything. But one thing I knew for certain is I didn't like Hillary. I remember her from a few years when I was younger about the whole Benghazi thing. I was like, that's crazy. But after Trump was elected, I was like, okay, wait. If the media said that this guy's insane, if a ton of people, including Republicans, said that this guy's insane, and they had all these people at the debate stage debating against him, and he had all these funny moments, how did he win the election? I started to do more research and realized that almost everything that they had said about Trump was wrong. It was lies. And everything that he wanted to do to make America great again were actually good things. He wasn't a racist. He literally wanted to make our country better. And I felt that I had been lied to by the mainstream media, lied to by basically every mainstream politician. And I just felt like it was the start of a rebellion in a way. And after seeing the amazing things he did for not only my community, but the country as a whole during his tenure in office, I decided to become a full-on supporter around 2017. And by 2018, I decided to get out there and speak about it publicly. And that's when I realized it gets even further than just what he does for the country. It's, there's a cultural divide of people that want to destroy this country, people that want to see us, fail. And I want to fight against people that want to see us fail.
You are the founder of YouTube's The Wright Brothers. I love that name. It doesn't have a W, folks. For those of you who are the airplane fanatics, like my dad was, this is the RIGHT Brothers. Tell me how that started.
Oh, gosh. I think all the way back to 2015. I remember vividly watching Trump announce his candidacy for president back then. And I remembered hearing words from him that I had not grown up hearing from any other politician in the past. And not only that, I began to witness the groundswell of support really begin to take shape in real time. I felt God laid it on my heart to begin speaking out more boldly on social media. So I marched into an iPad store up in Dallas, Texas, and I bought an iPad back in 2016, I want to say, and the rest was history from that point. So
you heard Donald Trump saying things that you hadn't heard a politician say before. Do you remember what some of those specific things were?
Chief among them were the remarks about illegal immigration. Myself living in a border state, living in Texas. I was born in Texas, moved around quite a bit because I'm an Air Force brat. So I've moved over 20 times in my life. But I was laying on my couch actually in my apartment working from home that day, and I was watching the speech live. And originally I was laying on my back, just listening out of the corner of my ear, if you will. And by the end of the speech, I had my laptop off to the side and I was sitting up and leaning forward, paying rapt attention because I was hearing a level of passion and a level of connectedness to the issues of the average everyday person that I had not heard from someone in quite some time. So the fact that he was willing to broach those topics and the fact that he was able to say all that he said without feeling beholden to any special interest groups, truly being his own man, I think that resonated with myself and many other individuals who truly have felt disenfranchised for a very long time. It's unfortunate that people feel forgotten in this country, that the American dream appears to be dead for many of them. And it's no surprise why individuals began to give their attention to Trump, because it seemed like someone was finally listening to things that mattered to them, things that were important to them. And that's only continued to intensify in the days, weeks, months, and years after he threw his hat in the political arena.
So almost immediately after he did that, and people will recall that when he was doing his show, the Apprentice, on television, it was wildly successful. It was like must-see TV for a lot of people. I think people really liked how he just cut through the BS, cut to the chase, and said, you're fired. You didn't do the job well, whatever. I remember really enjoying him and growing to like his style during that show. But of course, he comes down the golden escalator, as people remember, and for he grabbed your attention. For others, and maybe because they were simply afraid of him, but immediately the racism card was thrown. People talked about whether or not he had racist policies and whether or not people could rent spaces, real estate from him, etc. And I had friends who were convinced he is a card-carrying racist. That's what they believed. And people tended to believe the media a little bit more back then. But when you heard those allegations and accusations about his record on race, what did you make of that?
I couldn't square it with reality. And to your point, yes, individuals did believe the mainstream media much more prolifically in the past. But I remembered vividly those images of Donald Trump standing with figures like Reverend Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson being given awards for his service in the African-American community. So the fact that individuals were still able to pull the wool over others' eyes and claim that Trump was a racist person, he invited me to the White House 3 different times during his presidency. I went every single time. I can literally personally confirm that nothing could be further from the truth. But that goes to show the extent to which the mainstream media has a stranglehold on the minds of far too many individuals in this country. The beautiful thing, though, is now here we are in 2024, almost 9 years after he initially announced his candidacy. And people have been lied to over and over again with such a degree of regularity that now they can't help but to question what they are hearing. Now, of course, there are some individuals out there who still will take it hook, line, and sinker, whatever the left dishes out to them. But I would argue there has been a seismic shift as it relates to individuals' relationships with the media. And I would argue that now more than ever before, people like yourself, people like myself, and others who speak out, we honestly have usurped the media in many ways. And people will turn to individuals who have proven themselves to be accurate versus continuing to lap up whatever the left is going to dish up to them.
By the way, facing inflation, surging debt, and worldwide uncertainty, you are not alone. Central banks and many Americans are stockpiling gold. If you haven't thought about gold yet, now is the time. Trust Priority Gold to help you review your portfolio and diversify your savings with gold and silver. Text the word GOLDEN to 800-405-GOLD. For a free gold information guide on how to get started, text GOLDEN to 800-405-GOLD, GOLD. What kind of research did you do that sort of formulated your opinion?
Oh man, I definitely say I was raised to be a researcher and a reader. I definitely wasn't raised to just follow what the herd and the sheep mentality sort of taught. So, watching how Trump managed the country in the beginning, first few months, I remember in his first couple of months in office, he campaigned upon, we're going to destroy ISIS. He dropped the mother of all bombs on ISIS within like weeks or a couple of months of getting into office. And that, if you had talked to anybody, including myself in 2016 and 17, what you thought the greatest threat was, your people that were a bit more tuned in, they'd say, oh, China, maybe Russia. But for your average person, a lot of people were saying these Islamic terrorist groups, because they were saying, oh, we're going to come to America, we're going to blow things up, we're going to have mass shootings. They had a lot of them around that time. And so people were really scared of them. You don't even mention them now because they were obliterated, gone. But on top of keeping our country safe from Islamic terrorism, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda and these other terrorist groups that barely exist anymore now, although they started to come back during the Biden administration. I mean, the economic amazing things he did for our country, and even for the Black community itself. Like, we saw the lowest Black unemployment. We saw record investment in HBCUs. We saw the beginning of opportunity zones and many things like that. There's a video that went viral a few years ago of me when I spoke at a walk away panel with Brandon Strzok, and it was the Black Americans town hall with a few other Black conservatives that speak about this country and about conservative ideals. And, it's for people that walk away, leave the Democrat Party, leave the liberal ideology. And on that panel, I mentioned that I had grown up in a community that had basically shut down after the Obama administration and the Obama economy had started because of the recession, obviously. And it was, as Trump described it, the slowest economic recovery in American history. There was a building that had started building a little bit before had began construction a little bit before the recession and had stopped. And it literally did not start building again until 2017 and later on into 2018, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was finally signed into law by Trump. And we suddenly saw all these federal regulations. We saw the extreme taxes that were putting a chokehold on American business and the economy vanish. And all of a sudden there were new businesses, new restaurants. It's like my city had suddenly snapped back into place and it was growing again. And I finally had places to go that weren't just school and home. It was like the world had finally opened back up and things were finally starting to move again. And it was at that moment I realized that it really does matter who is in office, because they can make these landmark changes that will really drive not just your community, whether it be the Black community or where you grow up, not just your country, but the world forward.
So you've been to the White House, you've met with him. What is it people don't get?
People don't want to see Donald Trump as a human anymore, because to his adversaries, he is no longer human. That's why we've seen them draw frequent parallels between Trump and Hitler. It's honestly very clever subliminal messaging that I would argue led to the assassination attempt that we just witnessed. And I'm so thankful to God that God spared Donald Trump's life. But they have so caricaturized this man, and they've done so relentlessly over the years, that at a subconscious level, the average individual who does still believe the mainstream media no longer views them as human whatsoever. They no longer think that they are worthy of any sort of basic decorum or decency, and they will hurl the most vitriolic invective at any member associated to Trump. And I would mention, Michelle, also, you mentioned that one of your best friends despises Trump. And what I found most revealing over the past several years is that individuals like yourself, like myself, one of my best friends is a staunch Democrat from New York. And we talk almost on a daily basis, and we still respect each other. But that seems to be unilateral. That seems to not be unilateral, I should say.
Right.
It seems that individuals on the right, we're still willing to be friends and try to find common ground or agree to disagree. But all too often, individuals on the left side of the aisle, the minute they find out that you support Donald Trump, and not even support him holistically, let's say there's a few issues that are very important to you that Trump is willing to address, then it makes sense that you would support an individual who was upholding things that make sense to you. But on the left side of the aisle, if you sway or disagree with anything that their agenda has to promote, then they will cut you down in short order. And I think that says a lot about the state of political relations in this country. And I'm hoping it's rectified, because we've seen families needlessly destroyed simply because individuals could not respect differences of opinion. We've seen that rot continue to sweep across the country, and we simply have to address it, because it didn't used to be this way, and it shouldn't be this way moving forward.
The terms are crazy, and the most insane thing is that it sometimes is your own people that call you these terms. Like, for instance, when I was in middle school and I had just started doing the political thing, and sometimes kids would be like, oh my gosh, I saw, or my parents saw you on like some news site, or I saw you doing this. The favorite thing was, how do you reconcile supporting Trump while also being an African American person? Doesn't that make you like a bootlicker or some other things that, I'm not going to say on your podcast because I don't want you to get banned, but just insane things, like just straight up slurs. And I'd be like, well, first of all, do you not realize that you're perpetuating the exact same racism you claim to protest against by asking me and saying, well, hey, you're black, you can't support this candidate. In fact, 50 Cent, who's going really viral right now for basically coming out fully to support Trump, he used to date some woman. I'm forgetting what her name was. It was some lady. It was a white lady, and he dated her for a very short period of time. And then after they broke up, I think it was years later, and 50 Cent's now come out for Trump. It was in 2020 that she said, well, she said, quote unquote, I'm paraphrasing here, I had a conversation with him, and I said, you do know that you're black, right? You can't support him.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the most disgusting thing ever.
I think that was Chelsea Handler.
Okay, yeah, I thought that was the
Handler.
name. I thought that was the name. I didn't want to say it was the wrong one. I don't know.
No, of course you didn't. But I remember her saying that, and I thought to myself, she does know he has a brain of his own, doesn't she? And a mind of his own. I mean, her saying that it is as racist as anything I've heard.
It's the most ridiculous thing, and it's become so perpetuated within our society that it's not even considered wrong anymore, even though it is the exact same thing. Because if you rewind 150 years, they say, oh, you do know that you're black, right? You're supposed to work on my plantation. You're not supposed to have your freedom.
But let's play a little bit of this for you, and I'd like to get your reaction. Take a listen to Mark Cuban on white privilege.
That we're comfortable with, particularly those of you who look like me, the white community. Because it's hard to discuss race when you're white. The reality is, and just to be brutally honest, when people talk about white privilege, we get defensive. Right? We all have this mechanism that I call manufacturing equivalency to try to protect ourselves. We'll say, well, I have a lot of black friends. We'll say that I grew up in a mixed community, so I'm not like that. I can't possibly be someone who takes advantage of white privilege. We manufacture this equivalence. And it's incumbent upon us to stop doing that. Because that doesn't move us forward when we do that. And that's part of having a courageous conversation. And that's what we're here for today.
I'll take issue with this. He's saying that we manufacture this defense mechanism. To me, white privilege is a manufactured idea. So I just, and propagating it and saying, people who look like me, I'm so tired of that phrase. But what do you make of this? And how do you answer back to people who say, you're oppressed because whites have a privilege over you?
Mark Cuban has been consistently disingenuous with his takes as soon as he decided that he cared more about politics than about ostensibly winning an NBA championship most recently. What I would tell you is the issue with the white privilege argument and the issue with his remarks in general is the fact that he is, once again, as a large figurehead on the left side of the aisle, he is telling people how to think and what to say. That is what they do. Don't say this. Don't defend yourself. Just believe that what I'm saying is the truth and then proceed accordingly. I'll be the first to tell you, Mark Cuban knows more than most people, and he's been in close proximity to a vast number, or even a plethora, if you will, of extremely wealthy African-American individuals. The white privilege lie loses its luster when you're able to see direct contradictions there too. There are African Americans who litter the socioeconomic landscape. And I think we do ourselves harm when we begin to believe that no matter what we do, no matter how hard we work, there is always a boogeyman to point at. There's always a reason to explain away any perceived failings or shortcomings. The white privilege argument is one of the most shambolic arguments that the left frequently trots out whenever they presume that they are speaking to someone with whom it may resonate. I find it to be inherently deleterious because for a person of color to hear that argument, what they are then going to infer from it is that this country is set against them. They have zero opportunity for improvement. If you just look at the number of Black-only scholarships that are available to children that white kids wish they could apply for, it would make your head spin. But perceived oppression is the goal. I almost call it the Oppression Olympics. And if the Oppression Olympics was an actual sport, then Mark Cuban would have won several gold medals by now.
Hey, I've told you about my friends at besthotgrill.com who also make the best gas logs for your fireplace. Now is the time to prepare for the colder fall and winter seasons. You know, with rising energy costs, you'll want to warm one room, not your entire home, with a blazing Rasmussen gas log fire. With the convenience and controllability of a natural gas or propane gas log set, you can reduce the time you use your furnace. How cool is that? No pun intended. Gas logs are also an excellent source of emergency heat to keep your family warm during worrisome power outages. I mean, that would stink if you couldn't get warm. Rasmussen gas logs also make your fireplace look great when it's not in use. If your room has a modern or contemporary design, check out Rasmussen's popular fireballs and firestones. Get a free personalized log set sizing recommendation and more information about USA-made Rasmussen gas logs and Solaire infrared grills at besthotgrill.com. That's besthotgrill.com. USA-made Rasmussen gas logs and Solaire infrared grills at besthotgrill.com.
So when Barack Obama was elected, I looked at his skin color, looked at mine, I said, that's amazing. And then the years went by, and I looked at my community. There's this building I saw, and it started building, and then when, like a year into Obama's election, it stopped. And then it never started building again until a year after Trump's election. He was inaugurated. The economy came back. That building started building again. And I noticed that my community started improving again. New buildings everywhere. And I realized something. I realized it matters who's in office.
So Chandler, you said that the Democrat Party is losing people by the herdful, I think you said. I love that. I love that visual. Why? What have they done? What have they done to close themselves off so much?
Oh my gosh, what haven't they done? Everything that they've been championing on the culture side, despite the fact that, in my opinion, they really were winning the culture war for a while, is really starting to bite them in the back. There has been so many huge things that came out, whether it's, what was it? There was that transgender lady they invited to the White House that like took off her shirt and was just shaking herself around. And people were like, okay, wait a minute. The White House is supposed to be like a sacred place within our country, at least insofar as the political side of things. And we have people desecrating it. What is her name? Karine Jean-Pierre, who's just an absolute failure of a press secretary, basically just stopped having hearings for a while. And then even when she did, she would just say, well, I'm not taking questions from you. Kamala Harris, need I remind you guys that in 2020, she was in last place among, 18 Democratic presidential candidates, 18, 14, some amount around that. It was record-breaking numbers of candidates. She was literally polling behind Marianne Williamson, who is like the crystal lady that says we need to spread love. Kamala Harris was called
I will meet
cop.
you on that battlefield, and I will win with love.
Yeah, that's Marianne Williamson. Kamala Harris was polling behind her.
Yeah.
She had to drop out, and then for some reason, I guess Joe Biden was like, listen, I think the only way we can win is if we have a colored person. Oh, I'm not supposed to say that? Okay, a woman of color on the ticket. And they said, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, Kamala Harris, here we go. And now she might be the presidential candidate? Yeah, I'm saying it's looking pretty over for the DNC at this point.
So let's dig into DEI just a little bit more. Because I'm with you. I think these are people who want to divide us. I think that they are sowing divisions, sowing resentment. You're right, creating class warfare, gender warfare, race warfare. And it doesn't seem to me that any person with common sense can see this as unifying or helpful on any level. So, and, you know, I've heard some people say, yeah, but it is granting more opportunities to people. Okay. We can parse the statistics on that. But more than anything, as you've said, it's fostered this sense of we're all different. We have to be so sensitive the way, you know, you may not know you're racist, but you are. If you're born white, sorry, you have white privilege and you're racist. And if you deny it, it's because of your white privilege, and you accept it, it's because of your white privilege that made you, you know, now you're accepting that. I mean, it's this circle of death that you can't get out of. Right. So what do you think is the motivation? Is this people who are wanting to truly strengthen the country, or is this coming from sources that truly do want to divide our country?
Oh, they absolutely do. This is a playbook that's been utilized in other countries before. One of the most important steps, I would argue, of cultural Marxist playbooks is the ability to pit one side against another. There cannot be conflict where there is unity, but where there is disunity, there will always be anarchy. And the fact is, now we have people utterly convinced that people who look differently from them by virtue of the color of their skin, oh my gosh, they are to be hated, they are to be spurned, they are to be shunned. We should be extremely vocal in our displeasure of these individuals based on immutable characteristics. I can't tell you how many individuals, when I went to Texas A&M University and I was studying there were so many of my even fellow friends who were not African American. They were Caucasian themselves, and their families made not much more money than my family did, but they were denied the ability to get aid and grants that individuals and members of my community were allowed to get freely. It didn't make sense to me, and I began to see the divide even back then. And I'm so grateful that those individuals did not use that experience as a reason to begin to look at individuals of other ethnicities with contempt. But I also have to say, I'm starting to understand why more and more people do. And I'm not excusing that behavior, but I'm saying that that is what is intended. This is by design, because if you can get people to be more at odds with each other than be at odds with the individuals who are actually pulling the strings, not just in America, but across the world, then you keep us in a state of perpetual suspended animation, if you will, suspended development, arrested development, because we can't come together and unify and realize the people keeping all of us from achieving a better station in life are the individuals who are most sinisterly pretending as if they are the catalyst for our success. And I find that to be infuriating. Anyone else out there should as well.
Let's just talk about voter ID for a minute, because I don't know about you, but when I get on an airplane, I've got to show an ID. When I buy cold medication, I have to show an ID. When I want to buy a bottle of wine, I've got to show an ID. There are plenty of places we all need to show an ID. And the most sacred thing that we possess in this country outside of our liberty is our ability to vote for whom we want to vote. So shouldn't that require an ID? You know, this is not about taking away voters' rights. And of course, there's a part of the left that loves to say, you know, Donald Trump's going to take away your right to vote, which is just, I don't know.
Yeah, the thing I've said since 2020, when this voter ID thing really took a hold, especially after the things that happened in the 2020 election, people are starting to say, okay, listen, what's going on with our elections? Why aren't we making it a federal requirement for people to have an ID to vote rather than just a state's issue? Because on this one, I believe it should be a federal level. We have a federal elections commissions, for God's
Correct.
sake. I think we should be able to federally, electorally decide who is voting via their ID. This isn't to restrict people's right to vote. It is to protect their right to vote. The number one thing to remember is that for every illegal immigrant or person that should not be voting that votes, that basically counteracts your vote. It makes your vote worth slightly less. Yes. Whether they're voting for your party or against your party, regardless of that, that is still one more person that is voting that should not be voting. And Democrats and liberals are always like, oh my gosh, it's such a small number. These are pulling from studies that are only estimates. it is impossible to truly know how many illegal immigrants are actually voting, how many people that should not be voting are actually voting, especially when you consider how these voting processes were basically destroyed in November of 2020 with COVID, and the amount of mail-in ballots that were just shot out all across the country that we just took back in and said, yep, that sounds good. Let's just count it and not worry about who's voting it. This is the real problem. And so, no, voter ID is not disenfranchising people like the Democrats and liberals want to say. It is doing the opposite. It is protecting your ability to vote, and it is defending your vote from those that should not be doing it.
And by the way, the soft bigotry of low expectations to suggest that people who are low income or people, African Americans, whatever, that they can't get an ID, give me a break. That I can't stand that. Do you think that's why these people, because I believe a lot of these are the elitists in government that are doing it, and certainly academia, and I think the two are intertwined, frankly. Is that why they're so afraid of Donald Trump? I mean, that he is going to reveal so much of what is sinister in DC?
I truly believe that is the case. For a long time, they've been given carte blanche. They've been given blank checkbooks to do whatever they want to do on the American taxpayers' dime, absconding with our hard-earned money to fund their ridiculous or insidious pet projects in America and across the rest of the world. The fact that Donald Trump cannot be influenced the way they are used to influencing other politicians is the main reason why they view him as an existential threat, because he is. If he can bring that house of cards tumbling down, it exposes corruption that, honestly, as much as we know today, I still think would make the average person's jaw drop. There is information that the average American needs to know that is being actively withheld at this moment. There are files that need to be unsealed. There are people who are still locked up in our prisons in Washington, D.C. for the crime of exercising their First Amendment right. And they don't get the attention or any sort of sympathy from individuals who claim that, we have to be out in the streets. We remember the comments that the politicians made back then. There needs to be unrest in our streets like there's unrest in our lives. I think that was Representative Ayanna Pressley, Maxine Waters, get out, push back on them, all this rhetoric. But the minute that somebody on the other side of the aisle begins to actually do the same things that they encourage their people to do with impunity, all of a sudden that is a problem. So I believe that if you are giving directives to one side, not the other, then you are actively propagandizing them. It's no secret that the left has a militarized wing in Antifa and those miscreants who will engage in all sorts of unspeakable behavior under the auspices of caring about social justice. But anyone with a functioning brain knows that is nothing could be further from the truth.
So I can pretty much guess where you stand on this, but how are your conversations going with people who want to say, and that an open border is empathetic?
I want to say just look at Biden's answers about immigration and the border during the debate, and that'll tell you pretty much everything. People are starting to abandon the idea of open borders because they're starting to realize that this crime wave we're seeing in America and this fentanyl crisis we're seeing in America is in direct response to the fact that on January 2021, our country lost its border. It lost its ability to selectively decide who does and does not get into this country, at least on the southern border. And when you're landing on a plane, oh my gosh, it's all so secure, which is almost an insult in comparison to the fact that you can just walk through a river in some areas of Texas or Arizona and California and New Mexico, and boom, you're in the country. Now, granted, we do have some border patrol and we do have some sort of security, but it has been kneecapped by the Biden administration. There have been people that have come forward about this. Look at these border patrol agency unions, which is a union of agents that border the patrol, or patrol the border, I should say.
Right.
And they've all come out to endorse Trump because they know for a fact that Trump is actually going to let them do their jobs. Mm-hmm. Each and every single one of these men and women that protect our southern border aren't just doing it for a paycheck. They're doing it to keep our country safe. And by extension, they're doing it to keep their own families safe. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden has made it so that their jobs are next to impossible to do and is literally handcuffing them from the ability to protect our nation and protect their own families, all for the guise of supporting what the DNC says is, like you mentioned, an empathetic border, which is the exact reason why I believe the Democratic Party is starting to lose its own footing on the issue, because people are seeing the effects of it firsthand. there are more and more people that say, oh yeah, my cousin's sister's boyfriend's dog sitter died from fentanyl. Which, I say it like that, it sounds comedic until you realize almost every single American can say something like, hey, I know somebody that knows somebody, or I know somebody directly, 1 or 2 degrees of connection, that has died to fentanyl, whether they were just taking, a party drug and it was laced with something, they were smoking weed or something, and then they lose their life tragically because fentanyl is that dangerous of a drug. And it comes up through Mexico, but comes directly from China, of which Joe Biden says, oh, he's going to be so tough on China.
Yeah.
They're being tough on us. We're dying.
Yeah.
And you're saying Trump is weak on China, weak on the border? Stop the cap.
If you were to suggest ways that people, or a way that you think people can do good in their daily lives, what might you suggest?
There's a verse that I sing to my daughter every night before she goes to sleep. And it's 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So to answer your question, to encourage other people, what I would recommend is exude that strength, that power, that peace that can only come from within if you are a believer yourself. Use love. Even as trite as that saying may be, the left has co-opted it and turned it into love trumps hate, which of course is an oxymoron in and of itself. But treat people with love, because a lot of the despair that we see in the world today is because individuals feel as if they're not seen, they're not heard, they're not loved, they don't matter. And when people feel that way, they latch onto the first thing that pretends to care and love them, even though that thing itself may lead to their eventual destruction. And then finally, a sound mind. Be willing and confident to engage other individuals in conversation, those who are open to doing so. If you have a sound mind, if you understand and have done your due diligence to understand the perspective of the other side, it makes combating any flawed rhetoric that much easier, because you have that sense of security that comes with knowing the information cold inside and out. I've studied individuals on the left. I've been called every racist name in the book. I'm insulted on a daily basis. But you know what? I already know what's coming. I know how to diffuse it and to deflect it because I've done my due diligence, because God has blessed me also with the sound mind. So that's how I would answer that question to anyone out there who's listening. Just take heart and be willing to put some skin in the game, because this is a game that we can't afford to lose. And I would argue it's not even a game at all.